1985, Donald Trump bought the Mar-a-Lago Palace for just $8 million. 60 years earlier, it had cost $7 million to build. The U.S. government had just officially refused the palace as a gift. It was too expensive to maintain. The palace was dying, unwanted by anyone. And that's when Trump made his brilliant and utterly ruthless move. But have you ever wondered how, exactly, he forced the heirs to sell him a treasure for a pittance? He didn't raise his offer by a single cent. Instead, he bought a strip of land in front of the palace and threatened to build an ugly wall, destroying the ocean view forever. This tactic, blackmail, pure and simple, explains not only how he built his empire, but also what he turned this place into. I'll tell you how he managed to seize not just the building, but its very soul, and why it led to the FBI raiding the property one night. August 8, 2022. The Florida night is thick and humid, pressing down on the earth with the weight of unspoken secrets. The gilded silence of Mar-a-Lago, this palace from the American dream, is broken, not by the roar of a party or the hum of a private jet, but by a quiet, purposeful movement. A convoy of black SUVs, like an armored scalpel, cuts through the driveway. These are not guests. This is the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The gates, designed to impress aristocrats and deter paparazzi, open meekly in the face of a federal warrant. Agents with flashlights enter halls where every inch screams of wealth and power. Their beams glide across 16th century Spanish tiles, snatching coats of arms covered in gold leaf from the darkness, reflecting in Venetian mirrors. These walls were built for the whispers of diplomats and the laughter of heiresses, not for the crackle of radios and the tread of tactical boots. We see interiors familiar from glossy magazines, but now they are unrecognizable. The majestic ballroom, where presidents and billionaires once danced, has been turned into a temporary evidence locker. The marble bathroom, the pinnacle of personal luxury, has become the subject of a methodical search. A nameless storage closet in the basement has turned out to be the epicenter of a national scandal. But here is the paradox that hangs in the humid Florida air. This building was never meant to be a private fortress filled with secrets. It was conceived as its complete opposite. In her will, its creator gave this palace, her greatest creation, to the American people, with one single purpose: to serve the nation as an official winter White House, a place for statesmen, not for stashes. How did it happen that a palace born from a dream of eternal service to the state became the site of an unprecedented raid by that very same state on the home of a former president? To understand how an idealistic legacy turned into its fractured, scandalous opposite, we must go back to the very beginning, to the woman whose dream was carved from Genoese stone and gold, a woman whose ambitions were just as vast, and whose methods for getting her way were no less ruthless. We think of such palaces as being built on oil, steel, or railroads, on something solid, masculine, industrial. But the foundation of Mar-a-Lago is not granite or steel. It's something far more fragile and personal. It's American hypochondria. To understand where the money for this castle came from, we must travel back to the end of the 19th century, to the sterile corridors of a sanatorium in Battle Creek, Michigan. There, among the patients of Dr. Kellogg, a man obsessed with healthy eating, was a man named Charles William Post. He was not an industrialist, but a sufferer. His body and mind were a battlefield against dozens of illnesses, real and imagined. And in this temple of health, he made his greatest breakthrough. He didn't steal a recipe. He stole an idea. While Dr. Kellogg preached his cereal diets to a select circle of wealthy patients, Post saw not a cure, but a mass-market product. he realized he could sell not just flakes, but salvation. His first empire was built not on coffee, but on the fight against it. The drink postum, a coffee substitute, hit the market with an advertising campaign that would seem monstrous today. Archival newspapers cry out to us in the voice of Charles Post. Coffee is poison. It destroys the nerves. It leads to blindness. It steals a man's virility. Postum is not just a drink. It is a shield against the horrors lurking in your morning cup. Every cent earned by Post's company was minted from fear. Every share of his growing corporation was backed by a nation's anxiety about its own health. But the man who sold America a panacea could not heal himself. In 1914, he took his own life. And that is when his daughter enters the stage. Marjorie Merriweather Post. She is only 27 years old. She inherits $20 million and a business built on pain. She could have been just another socialite, burning through her father's fortune. But she inherited not only his money, but also his business acumen, cleansed of his demons. Her stroke of genius changes everything. In 1929, at the very peak of the Roaring Twenties, when the entire country was drunk on easy money, she bet against the tide. For $22 million, her company buys the patent for Clarence Birdseye's quick freezing technology. It was an astronomical sum for an idea few believed in. A few months later, the stock market crashed. The Great Depression began. And while other empires turned to dust, Marjorie Post's empire grew stronger than ever. Cheap, accessible Birdseye frozen food appeared on the tables of millions of Americans. Marjorie forever changed the way the nation ate. Wealth born of fear was multiplied by a brilliant bet on cold. Now she had virtually limitless resources. But in early 20th century America, money, even vast amounts of it, didn't grant the one thing that mattered most: acceptance. To break into high society, she needed more than a checkbook. She needed to make a statement, and she was going to carve it in stone. Palm Beach in the Roaring Twenties wasn't just a place on a map. It was an exclusive club where membership was inherited. The Vanderbilts, the Rockefellers, the Astors. Their names were old money, with roots so deep in American soil, they seemed a part of it. Their homes were a reflection of their status. Elegant, understated Mediterranean-style villas. Architecture that whispered of wealth, not shouted. And then, Marjorie Post arrives. Her money doesn't smell of oil and steel, but of cornflakes. To the old guard, she's an upstart. The queen of breakfast, trying to buy her way to the aristocrat's table. And Marjorie understands this. She knows that to simply build another beautiful villa would be to accept their rules, their superiority. So she decides not to play their game. She decides to blow up the playing field. Her first move is brilliant and audacious. She buys the best plot of land on the entire island, a swampy, mosquito-infested patch of earth that everyone considered unfit for construction. But it was the only spot that overlooked both the Atlantic Ocean and Lake Worth. She named it Mar-a-Lago, from sea to lake. The name itself was a declaration of capturing the very heart of this paradise. Then, she assembles her army. But instead of generals, she has creators. She hires not one, but two visionaries. Marion Sims Wyeth, a respected Palm Beach architect, was to create the building's bones, a solid, flawless frame that would appease the critics. But for the soul of her palace, she turns to a man from another world, Joseph Urban, a Viennese genius, the set designer for the Broadway extravaganzas of the Ziegfeld Follies. She hired an architect to build a house and a set designer to build a legend. The choice of style is a direct blow to the establishment, not the restrained Mediterranean, but a lavish, theatrical, Hispano-Moresque style. This isn't an homage to history. It's an act of cultural appropriation on an industrial scale. It was as if she were telling them, "You brought your money from Europe, but I, with money earned on American soil, have brought you Europe itself. Its stones, its tiles, its ceilings, and I've built something more authentic and magnificent than your pale imitations." From the very beginning, Mar-a-Lago wasn't a home. It was a weapon in a social war. Every stone in its walls was an argument. Every whimsical arch, a statement of superiority. Marjorie Post didn't come to Palm Beach to fit in. She came to rewrite the rules and build her own Versailles. She staked her claim to the pinnacle of society. But to erect her throne, she first had to win a war against the very land on which she stood. And that war would begin with explosions. Before the first stone could be laid, a war had to be declared. And the first thing in the line of fire was the very nature of Florida. Today, Palm Beach is synonymous with paradise on earth, manicured, tamed, perfect. But in the early 20s, the land Marjorie Post bought was defiant. It was a primordial world, wedged between the salt ocean and the freshwater lake. A sticky heat with no escape, thick grass teeming with snakes, and air that buzzed with clouds of malaria-carrying mosquitoes. Nature here did not invite. It resisted, and Marjorie answered it with force. Her first enemy lay beneath the ground, an ancient coral reef, the 1,000-year-old bone of the earth on which the entire island rested. To modern engineers, it would be a sanctuary to be protected. To Marjorie and her builders, it was merely an obstacle. To lay a foundation strong enough to bear the weight of her dream, the reef had to be destroyed. We see an army of workers descending into trenches. They drill holes into the living rock, plant dynamite, and then an explosion. Archival footage mixes with graphics, showing geological time shattering into pieces in a single moment. The ancient skeleton, formed over centuries, is reduced to dust and rubble. This isn't construction. It's geological surgery without anesthesia. Every blast that scarred the face of the earth was paid for by millions of American breakfasts. The power to crush coral was born from the profits of cornflakes and frozen peas. But the war was fought on all fronts. Workers drained swamps, reclaiming every foot from the mire. They battled the suffocating humidity that rusted tools and exhausted bodies. They collapsed from heat stroke. They lived in constant fear of the diseases carried by insects. This was a battle not for comfort, but for the very existence of the project. To Marjorie Post, nature was not a sanctuary. It was a resource, an obstacle to be overcome with will and unlimited capital. She wasn't building on the land. She was building the land itself, literally commanding it to change, to yield, to bend beneath the weight of her ambition. The foundation of Mar-a-Lago was laid on the rubble of an ancient world. The land of Florida had been conquered. But now, Marjorie had to conquer the old world itself. Because for the walls of her palace, she demanded stones with a much deeper history. And for them, she was ready to wage a new war, a war against the material itself. The foundation, torn from nature, was merely a canvas. The paints for this picture had to be sourced from thousands of miles away, from the very heart of the old world. Marjorie Post wasn't just building a house. She was creating an artifact, and for that, she needed authentic fragments of history. A logistical war of unprecedented scale began. Her agents, like treasure hunters, scoured Europe. They weren't looking for the new and shiny. They were looking for the old, the worn, the steeped in time. In Spain, they bought up entire castles doomed for demolition. Not for the land, but for their skin. 36,000 ancient ceramic tiles, baked with centuries of Spanish sun. Every little crack, every chip, was not a defect to Marjorie, but a mark of authenticity. But the ultimate trophy was to be stone. Not American limestone, but noble Dorian stone from the quarries of Genoa, the very same from which Michelangelo sculpted his giants. 3 enormous cargo ships were chartered to transport this stone spine of the future palace across the Atlantic. And then, after a long voyage, the first ship arrives at the port of Palm Beach. Marjorie Post stands on the pier, not a socialite, but a general inspecting her troops. The workers open the holds, and she sees the stone, its color, its texture. Something is wrong. The shade is a half-tone off from the sample she had personally approved. For any other developer, this would have been a minor annoyance. But not for her. This was not the stone she had seen in her dream. Without hesitation, she rejects the entire shipment. Dozens of tons of priceless Italian stone. Her order sounds like a sentence. Send it back. Picture this scene. An entire ship that has crossed the ocean turns around and sails back to Genoa. The costs, colossal. The delays, catastrophic. But for Marjorie, the price was irrelevant. Her palace would not tolerate compromises. Every stone in its walls was not just a building material. It was a trophy, won in a battle against distance, time, and imperfection. We see ships crossing the Atlantic again and again. We see 20,000 roof tiles brought from ancient villas in Cuba. How 2,200 square feet of black and white marble for the dining room are quarried in Italy. Mar-a-Lago was literally being assembled piece by piece from all over Europe, like a giant mosaic. Marjorie didn't import a style. She imported history itself. She wanted the walls of her American palace to whisper in ancient tongues. But to make these stones speak, she needed craftsmen whose hands remembered age-old secrets. And their arrival in Palm Beach would ignite a new, far more furious conflict. Along with the stones and tiles from Europe came the most valuable and most explosive cargo of all: people. Marjorie Post understood. For her palace to look as if it had stood for 500 years, it had to be built by those in whose veins ran the blood of the old masters. She brought over the best stonemasons from Italy, mosaic specialists from Spain, and woodcarvers from Austria. And on the construction site of Mar-a-Lago, 2 worlds collided, separated not just by an ocean, but by a chasm in work culture. On one side, the Europeans, men who spoke a dozen different languages, whose families had passed down the secrets of their craft from father to son for centuries. They worked not by the clock, but by the sun. They treated the stone as a living thing, feeling its character, its soul. For them, this wasn't construction. It was art. On the other side, the American labor unions, young, strong, organized. They fought for the 8-hour workday, for fixed wages, for safety on the job. For them, it was a job to be done according to clear rules and for fair pay. They saw the Europeans as outsiders, willing to work for pennies and take the bread from their mouths. The site became a Tower of Babel, where instead of a common language, there were only shouts and curses. The diaries and letters of the workers, which we found in the archives, tell us this story. An Italian stonemason complains that the American foreman forces him to lay stones faster, faster, not understanding that every strike of the hammer must be precise. A union member writes home that these foreigners are willing to sleep right on the construction site, destroying all the standards they had fought for. Every dollar spent on this project was a point of contention. The Europeans were used to being paid for the finished work, the Americans to an hourly wage. Conflicts erupted over everything, over tools, over lunch breaks, over masonry techniques. Sometimes, the arguments escalated into brawls. It was an invisible war, hidden behind the scaffolding and walls of the growing palace. A war between age-old traditions and the industrial age, between individual craftsmanship and collective rights. Marjorie Post, the mistress of this battlefield, demanded one thing: results. She didn't care what language her workers spoke, as long as their hands were creating a masterpiece. But she didn't realize she wasn't just building a palace. She was building a monument to one name, her own. And it would be erected by the hands of hundreds of nameless immigrants and local workers, whose names have been all but erased by history, whose sweat and blood soaked into the Genoese stone and Spanish tiles, becoming the invisible ink with which the legend of Mar-a-Lago was written. As the walls of Mar-a-Lago grew taller, so did the murmurs. But now they came not from the construction site, but from the cool living rooms and shady verandas of Palm Beach's most prestigious villas. The old guard watched this construction with poorly concealed horror. For them, the heirs of old money, architecture was the language of restraint. Their homes were elegant, harmonious. They blended into the landscape rather than dominating it. And what Marjorie Post was building seemed to them a monstrous violation of all the rules of good taste. We flip through the yellowed pages of newspapers and private diaries from that time, and we hear their voices, full of venom and snobbery. Vulgar, they whisper at their cocktail parties. Gaudy, they write in letters to friends up north. One of the pillars of society disdainfully called Mar-a-Lago a palace built on cereal money. This phrase became their battle cry. They saw in this building not a work of art, but a monument to bad taste, a monument to new money, which can be earned but not inherited. They ridiculed its eclectic style. The stone bas-reliefs of animals from children's fairy tales, which Marjorie ordered carved on the walls, seemed infantile to them. The gigantic Spanish-style tower, rising above the entire island, was perceived as an aggressive gesture, a scream of, "Look at me." But Marjorie heard these whispers, and they didn't stop her. On the contrary, they fueled her. She was waging a war against their taste, against their sense of proportion. And to their every barb, she responded with even greater, even more defiant luxury. Their homes are modest? She would order an exact replica of the ceiling from the Accademia Gallery in Venice, one of the greatest masterpieces of the Italian Renaissance. And not just a replica. She ordered it to be covered in real gold leaf. $500,000 at 1920s prices were spent just so that her guests, upon looking up, would see not just a ceiling, but pure, shining wealth. This wasn't just a demonstration of money. It was an escalation. Every $1,000 spent was a response to their contempt. Every artifact brought from Europe was an argument in the debate she was having with them in her head. Marjorie wasn't just building a house to impress them. She was building a fortress from which she could look down on them. But this war had a price. And while Marjorie was spending millions to win the social battle, on another front, she was risking losing a far more important war. The war with her own budget. Every obsession has a price. And Marjorie Post's obsession with her palace began to run up a bill that could bankrupt even her. The initial estimate, drawn up in 1924, seemed astronomical, $2.5 million. That amount would have been enough to build a small city. But for Marjorie, this was just the starting point. Very soon, the budget began to fall apart at the seams. A shipment of stone sent back to Genoa. 36,000 antique Spanish tiles, purchased at the price of works of art. A gold ceiling worth $500,000. Every decision, dictated by her perfectionism, punched a new hole in the financial dam. The estimate skyrocketed. 3 million. 4. 5. The final figure, when the last speck of dust settled, froze at the $7 million mark, almost 3 times the original plan. Today, that's the equivalent of over $120 million. Money that turned the construction into one of the most expensive private ventures in American history. And there was a man who saw this madness not as the creation of a legend, but as a hemorrhage of capital. Her second husband, Edward Francis Hutton. He wasn't a dreamer, but a financier, one of the kings of Wall Street. His genius lay in making money work. And here, in Palm Beach, he watched in horror as his brilliant stock market winnings, earned in the roaring 20s, drained into this giant stone pit. We can imagine the scenes that played out behind closed doors, tense conversations where the logic of numbers clashed with the force of an indomitable will. Hutton, with accounting reports in hand, tried to appeal to reason. Marjorie, with blueprints and marble samples, answered him in the language of eternity. For him, it was stocks, bonds, lost profits. For her, a legacy. In this battle, money was no longer the goal for Marjorie. It had become merely the fuel that she ruthlessly shoveled into the furnace of her ambitions. Every million spent over budget only strengthened her resolve. She could not afford to lose. Not to her husband, not to Palm Beach society, and not to herself. She won the war with the budget by simply refusing to acknowledge its existence. She paid any price to see her vision through to the end. But while she waged battles with people and numbers, an enemy was approaching from the east, from the Atlantic, an enemy that cared nothing for her money or her will, an enemy capable of turning her $7 million masterpiece into a pile of rubble with a single blow. That enemy's name was the Hurricane. September 1928. The sky over Florida darkens. The air grows heavy, still, as if holding its breath before the catastrophe. A monster approaches from the ocean, the great Okeechobee hurricane, one of the deadliest in the history of the United States. The wind begins to howl, turning into the roar of a wounded beast. It rips roofs from houses like hats. It uproots 100-year-old palm trees. Palm Beach, a paradise for millionaires, becomes a war zone where the elements unleash an artillery barrage on the works of man. Waves the height of a 3-story building crash onto the shore, washing away elegant villas, wiping the fruits of human pride from the face of the earth. Thousands of people perish. Entire neighborhoods are turned to ruins. Amid this apocalypse, this chaos and debris, stands the unfinished but nearly unscathed frame of Mar-a-Lago. Its walls, built of Genoese stone on a foundation blasted into an ancient reef, take the blows of winds at 145 miles per hour. Its Spanish tiles, laid by craftsmen who knew the secrets of the ages, hold fast. The building doesn't just survive, it defies the elements. For Marjorie Post, this was no accident. It was an omen, a divine confirmation that she was right. While nature punished others for their fragility and hubris, it spared her creation, as if God himself had acknowledged the greatness of her design. The hurricane, a tragedy for thousands, became a triumph for her. Now she could tell her critics, "You built beautiful houses. I built a fortress. You built on sand. I built on eternal stone." Her palace wasn't just beautiful, it was indestructible. This natural disaster became the final, most powerful argument in her favor. She completed the myth of Mar-a-Lago before its first guest even set foot inside. She proved that her will, backed by almost limitless money, could withstand not only public opinion, but the very fury of the planet. The palace was completed. Marjorie Post had won all her wars and ascended to the throne as the Queen of Palm Beach. She had created a monument that she believed would stand forever, carrying her name and her dream into the world. She had built her perfect stage. But she could never have imagined that half a century later, a new, entirely different actor would step onto that stage, and he would not abide by her script. He would seize her theater by force and stage his own, entirely new play, a sharp jump in time. The Roaring '20s give way to the neon '80s. The Jazz Age yields to the era of disco and corporate raiders. Mar-a-Lago, once a shining palace, had become a fading ghost. Marjorie Post's dream had shattered against the harsh rocks of reality. After her death in 1973, the government, to whom she had willed her palace, politely declined the gift. Maintaining this stone giant was too expensive. Protecting it, under the roar of planes from the nearby airport, was too difficult. Mar-a-Lago had become a priceless treasure that nobody wanted. Her daughters, unable to bear the $1 million annual upkeep, put the house on the market for $20 million. But there were no buyers. The palace was slowly dying. The paint was fading, the gilding was flaking, and a draft was the only thing moving through the vast halls, whispering of former glory. And then he appears on the scene. A young, brash developer, unknown outside of New York, named Donald Trump. He was no aristocrat. His money was new, smelling of concrete and skyscraper glass. In the fading Mar-a-Lago, he saw not history, but an asset. The greatest trophy on the Florida coast. The second battle for Mar-a-Lago begins, and it's fought by an entirely different set of rules. There's no room here for perfectionism or an obsession with art. This is a cold, predatory game of beating down the price. Trump's first offer, $15 million. Marjorie's estate, insulted by such a low price, indignantly refuses. They still believe they are selling a legend. Trump understands they are selling a problem. And that's when he makes his brilliant and utterly ruthless move. He doesn't raise the price. He changes the rules of the game. He finds and buys a small but critically important plot of land right in front of Mar-a-Lago, a narrow strip between the palace and the ocean. And then he announces his plans to build a modern, ugly building on that spot, which would forever, irrevocably, spoil the legendary sea view. This wasn't a negotiation. It was blackmail. He took the most valuable thing Mar-a-Lago had, its beauty, its soul, hostage. He threatened not just to reduce the palace's value, but to destroy the very reason for its existence. The estate was trapped. They could either sell the house to him at his price, or watch their legacy become a property with a view of a concrete box. They surrendered. In 1985, Donald Trump bought Mar-a-Lago. $5 million for the palace itself, and another $3 million for all the antique furniture and works of art. $8 million for a treasure that had cost $7 million to create 60 years earlier. It was one of the greatest real estate deals in history. The first dynasty, the dynasty of the creator, had ended. The second dynasty, the dynasty of the conqueror, had begun. Marjorie Post built her palace to defeat old money. Donald Trump seized it using tactics that old money couldn't even fathom. He had won the battle for the purchase, but now he faced a new war, a war with the city he had just conquered. Donald Trump had seized the palace, but he hadn't seized the kingdom. Palm Beach still belonged to the old guard, and they looked upon Mar-a-Lago's new master with the same contempt they'd had for its creator. To them, he was an even louder, more vulgar upstart than Marjorie Post, and they were going to give him a fight. The conflict was inevitable. Trump had no intention of living in 126 rooms alone. He saw Mar-a-Lago not as a home, but as a business machine. He wanted to turn it into an exclusive private club, selling memberships for hundreds of thousands of dollars. But under Palm Beach law, this was forbidden. Mar-a-Lago was a historic landmark, a private residence. Period. A long, grueling war with the town council began. We see archival footage of these meetings. Dull, dusty rooms where the electrified air crackles with mutual hatred. On one side, the gray-haired council members, the personification of the old order, speaking the language of rules and regulations. On the other, a young Trump in a bright tie, speaking the language of threats and lawsuits. The town says no. Trump responds with a $100 million lawsuit. He doesn't just challenge their decision. He accuses them of discrimination. His club, he declares, will be open to anyone who can pay, including Jews and African Americans, who for decades had been barred from the old exclusive clubs of Palm Beach. He masterfully turned his commercial interest into a fight for civil rights. But the culmination of this war wasn't a court case, but an absurd, almost comical spectacle. The Flagpole War. Trump decided to install an American flag on his property, a patriotic gesture. But he didn't just install a flagpole. He erected an 80-foot monster, 24 meters. It was twice as high as town regulations allowed. The flag was so huge, it resembled the sail of a galleon. For the town council, this was yet another brazen violation. They started issuing fines, $1,250 a day. For Trump, this was a gift. He turned the daily fines into a patriotic spectacle. He claimed he was being persecuted for his love of country. He, Donald Trump, was willing to pay any price for the right to display the American flag. This battle lasted for months. In the end, they reached a compromise. Trump agreed to lower the flagpole to 70 feet and donated $100,000 to a veterans charity. He lost 10 feet, but he won the war for public opinion. In each of these battles, he demonstrated his greatest talent. He didn't follow the rules. He blew them up and then built his own reality on the rubble. Marjorie Post fought her wars with money and perfectionism, trying to prove she was worthy of belonging to the elite. Trump fought his wars with lawsuits and scandals, proving that the elite and their rules meant nothing to him. He didn't just buy Mar-a-Lago. He was rewriting its DNA in his own image. Having won the right to rewrite the rules, Trump began to rewrite the stone itself. He had no intention of being a mere custodian of Marjorie Post's legacy. He decided to become her co-author, and if she used architecture to create a legend, he used it to create a brand. His masterstroke, the construction of a new ballroom. Marjorie considered her ballroom the pinnacle of elegance. To Trump, it seemed not big enough, not impressive enough, so he built his own. The Donald J. Trump Ballroom, 20,000 square feet of pure, unadulterated, Louis XIV-style kitsch. He spent $7 million on it, exactly as much as Marjorie had spent to build the entire palace. Every detail in this room screams, bigger, more expensive, louder. He moves through the palace like a conqueror, leaving his mark. The antique coats of arms that Marjorie had carefully brought from Europe seem not bright enough for him. He orders them covered in gold leaf. They cease to be artifacts and become decorations. Wherever possible, he adds his initials, DJT. These 3 letters, woven into the ornaments, become the new symbol of the palace. Marjorie Post brought history to Mar-a-Lago. Donald Trump erased it, replacing it with his own name. If, for her, architecture was a way to assert her cultural weight, her connection to the past, for him, It became a marketing tool, a way to sell access, proximity to power, the illusion of belonging to a new aristocracy of his own making. He didn't destroy Mar-a-Lago. Perhaps he saved it from oblivion, but he ripped out Marjorie Post's soul and replaced it with his own ego. He turned a historical monument into a backdrop, a perfect, gilded set for the endless reality show called Donald Trump. Every new layer of gold paint was paid for, not with money from breakfast cereal, but with membership fees to his club. Every stone in the wall of the new ballroom is not a stock bought on the brink of bankruptcy, but a check written for the chance to be in the same room with a man who turned his name into a synonym for success. Marjorie built a monument to the American dream as she saw it, respectable, cultured, in service to the nation. Trump rebuilt it into a monument to a different American dream, branded, media-savvy, and serving only itself. Two creators, two eras, two completely different visions of what a palace should be. But their creations were destined to collide within the same walls, creating a kaleidoscope of two entirely different realities. The walls of Mar-a-Lago are silent witnesses. They have seen two dynasties, two Americas, two completely different ways of living, breathing, and ruling within the same space. A cinematic montage takes us back and forth in time. Black and white footage. Marjorie Post, in an elegant gown, leads her guests. The Duke and Duchess of Windsor, the Kennedy family, kings and empresses. But here is the most surprising moment of her parties. She begins a quadrille, and her partners are not just aristocrats. She invites her gardeners, cooks, and chauffeurs into the circle. For her, hospitality was a form of service, erasing, if only for one evening, class distinctions, a sharp cut to color. Donald Trump is hosting the President of the People's Republic of China, Xi Jinping. The same dining room, the same black and white marble floor. But the atmosphere is different, tense, businesslike. And in the middle of dinner, between the chocolate cake and coffee, President Trump announces a missile strike on Syria. The dining hall, built for socialite chatter, transforms for a few minutes into the White House Situation Room. History is being made right here, before the eyes of stunned guests. Marjorie's guests came by invitation. They were part of her world. Trump's guests came with a check. They paid up to $200,000 for an initiation fee to his club. They weren't just buying access to the pool and golf course. They were buying proximity. The chance to whisper something in the ear of the most powerful man in the world while he ate his favorite steak. But was this place ever a home? We hear the voice of Marjorie's daughter, actress Dina Merrill. In an interview, she recalls her childhood in these gilded halls. The house was very cold, she says, and not cozy for a child. Too big, too formal, too grandiose to feel at home in. This phrase is the key to understanding Mar-a-Lago. It was never a happy family nest. It was always a stage. Marjorie built a stage to showcase her taste, her status, her vision of service to the nation. Trump repurposed that stage to showcase his power, his brand, his vision of commercial success. The actors changed, the sets were slightly updated, but the essence remained the same. Mar-a-Lago is not a place where you live, it's a place where you perform. And the main drama in this theater's history was yet to come. It began the moment its creator's greatest dream collapsed, the very dream that was the reason for its existence. 1981. In the quiet of a government office, to the rustle of papers, a dream is dying. The lifelong dream of Marjorie Merriweather Post. 8 years after her death, the United States government officially rejects her greatest gift. Mar-a-Lago, the palace she bequeathed to the nation to serve as the winter White House, is turned down. The reasons for this rejection are painfully mundane. They have nothing to do with the grandeur of the vision or the beauty of the architecture. It is the cold, ruthless calculation of bureaucrats. Reason 1: money. The annual upkeep for this giant, in 70s prices, was over $1 million. Taxes, security, a staff of servants. For the National Park Service, tasked with managing the palace, it was an unbearable burden. The United States Treasury looked at Marjorie's gold leaf ceiling and said, "Too expensive." Reason 2: noise. Mar-a-Lago, this paradise on earth, had one fatal flaw. It was located directly in the flight path of the local airport. The roar of jet engines every few minutes made the place a nightmare for the Secret Service. The palace, built as a fortress against hurricanes, was defenseless against the noise of commercial aviation. The dream of a winter White House, a place where presidents would decide the fate of the world surrounded by works of art, shattered against a budget estimate and a flight schedule. This moment, this quiet, bureaucratic decision, became the main turning point in the history of Mar-a-Lago. It predetermined everything that happened next. The government's rejection was not just the end of Marjorie's dream. It was the beginning of a new, unpredictable chapter. It was this rejection that condemned the palace to a slow decline. It was this that forced Marjorie's daughters to put it up for sale. It was this that created the vacuum that allowed a predator like Donald Trump to seize this priceless asset for a pittance. And here, history performs its most ironic pirouette. By rejecting the palace, the government paradoxically opened the door for the man who would, after all, turn it into a winter White House. Not officially, not by bequest, but by the force of his own political will. Marjorie Post's dream did come true, after all. But it came true in a distorted, commercialized, scandalous, and utterly unpredictable form that she could never, not even in her worst nightmare, have imagined. She wanted to give the nation a palace for the ideal presidents from history textbooks. Instead, she got a set for a reality show president. She wanted to enter history through the front door, with the nation's blessing. Instead, she entered through the back, thanks to a bureaucratic rejection and the audacity of a real estate developer. Fate played a cruel joke on her. But the greatest irony was yet to come. And so, we are here again. The night of August 8th, 2022. The beams of FBI agents' flashlights once again glide across the walls. But now we see these walls differently. We see not just stone and gold in them. We see layers of time, the imprints of two indomitable wills. This palace survived not in spite of, but because of them. It endured because the two most restless, ambitious, and egocentric personalities of their eras invested everything they had into it. Marjorie Post invested the money earned from the nation's fears and appetites. Donald Trump, the energy born from scandal and self-promotion. Mar-a-Lago is not a monument to a style or an era. It is a monument to American ambition in its most extreme, purest forms. And in this light, the FBI raid ceases to be just a news story. It becomes the final, most ironic act in the long drama of this place. Marjorie Post wanted her home to serve the American government. She dreamed that in these halls, statesmen would make wise decisions for the good of the country. And now, nearly 100 years later, her dream was fulfilled in the most twisted way. The American government did indeed come to her home, not with gratitude, but with a search warrant, not to govern, but to confiscate. The stones of Mar-a-Lago remember everything. They remember the roar of dynamite blasting the ancient reef. They remember the whispers of European craftsmen and the shouts of union leaders. They remember the quadrille danced by dukes and gardeners. They remember the tense silence in the dining room when the missile strike was announced. And now, they hold a new secret. The secret of hundreds of classified documents found in the ballroom, in a bathroom, in a storage closet. The building, constructed to make history, became evidence itself. The palace, bequeathed to the nation for its statesmen, became a storage facility for state secrets. What is more enduring? The stone from which these walls are built? Or the uncontrollable chaos of human passions, political ambitions, and historical accidents that forever changes the purpose of that stone? Mar-a-Lago offers no answer. It just stands, washed by the salt winds of the Atlantic, like an eternal gilded question, a monument to two dynasties, two dreams, and one very American irony. The story of Mar-a-Lago is not a story of walls, but of a will, frozen in stone. The dream of one era, built on perfectionism and service to the nation, gave way to the dream of another, predatory, media-savvy, and serving only itself. The palace survived, becoming a mirror that reflected two irreconcilable souls of America. So what ultimately defines the soul of a place? The creator's original vision, or the indomitable will of the one who seized it last? And what is more enduring, the stone that holds memory, or the person who eternally seeks to rewrite it for themselves? Perhaps you are the one writing the answer to this question. Share your thoughts in the comments. Every voice in this dialogue is important to us. And if this story made you think, please support our work with a like and a subscription to the channel so we can keep telling these stories.